4 days later, she was dead. Somewhere in a quiet neighborhood in North Canton, Ohio. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. The streets are empty. The houses are dark. Most people are deep in sleep. A car rolls slowly into the neighborhood. No music playing. No headlights. It parks across the street from a small house and sits there, completely still. The engine idles. The driver doesn't move. He just watches. He knows this house. He knows the woman inside. He knows exactly what time she's going to walk out that front door. And when she does, Morgan Fox never made it to work. She was 29 years old, a single mother, a hard worker, a woman who had done everything right, reported the harassment, filed the complaints, protected herself the only way she knew how. And none of it was enough, because the man who killed her had been hiding in plain sight for months, watching her, filming her, convincing himself that she belonged to him. This is the story of Morgan Fox and the investigation that almost fell apart before it even began. To understand what happened to Morgan Fox, you have to first understand who she was, not just the victim, the person. Morgan was born on August 22, 1991, in the state of Ohio. Her childhood wasn't simple, but it was full. When she was still young, her parents divorced. She stayed with her mother along with her 4 brothers and sisters. Then her mother remarried, a man who came with 7 children of his own. Overnight, Morgan went from a family of 6 to a household of 14. 12 children under one roof. And somehow, it worked. By every account from people who knew them, that home was loud and chaotic and imperfect, but it was genuinely close-knit. Morgan grew up knowing what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself, to show up for people, to hold things together even when it wasn't easy. She carried that with her into adulthood. At 21 years old, Morgan became a mother. She had a daughter, a little girl who, from the very first moment, became the center of everything Morgan did. The relationship with the child's father didn't last. There was no dramatic fallout, no long legal battle. It simply ended, and Morgan picked up the pieces without complaint and moved forward, alone, because that was who Morgan Fox was. She didn't wait for someone to rescue her. She worked multiple jobs, back-to-back shifts, whatever it took. Not for herself, for her daughter, so that her little girl would never go without, would never feel the instability that comes when a parent gives up. Morgan never gave up. Eventually, a position opened at a FedEx distribution warehouse. Morgan applied, got hired, and then did what she always did. She worked harder than everyone around her. She moved up through the ranks, earned promotions, was eventually elevated into a management position. She was building something real. And it was at FedEx that she met Jason, her boyfriend. He was a single father as well, raising a daughter on his own, navigating the same kind of complicated life that Morgan knew well. They understood each other. A few months into the relationship, they decided to make it official. They found a house together in North Canton, Ohio, not far from Morgan's job. 2 parents, 2 daughters, a blended family with big plans and every reason to believe the hard part was behind them. Morgan Fox had fought for everything she had. She had built her life brick by brick, shift by shift, with her bare hands. She was 29 years old and finally, things were falling into place. That October morning, she had a night shift to get to. She would never arrive. October 28th, 2020. Morgan woke up early, just as she always did on workdays. She and her mother had a ritual, a simple one. Every morning before a shift, her mother would call, just a quick check-in, just to make sure Morgan was awake, that she hadn't slept through her alarm. It was the kind of small, ordinary thing that only matters when it stops. That morning, the call came through right on time. spoke briefly, the usual exchange, nothing out of the ordinary. Morgan told her mother she needed to get going, said goodbye, hung up. The house was quiet. Her boyfriend Jason was still sleeping. His shift wouldn't start for hours. Morgan got ready, gathered her things, walked out the front door into the cold October darkness, got into her car. And that is where the story of her morning ends. 5 hours later, at approximately 6:30 in the morning, a 911 call came in. It was Jason, Morgan's boyfriend. He asked for police and paramedics to be sent to the house. The dispatcher asked what was happening. Jason's response was 4 words. "I'm pretty sure my girlfriend is dead." He said he had woken up to get ready for his shift, started moving through his morning routine. But when he stepped outside, something stopped him. Morgan's car was still in the driveway. She should have left hours ago. He walked toward the car, and when he got close enough to see through the window, Morgan was slumped in the front seat. There was a significant amount of blood. She wasn't moving. Jason told the dispatcher he already knew she was gone. Her body was cold. No pulse. When the dispatcher asked if he had attempted CPR or first aid, Jason said there was no point. Paramedics arrived minutes later. There was nothing they could do. Morgan Fox was officially pronounced dead at the scene. She was 29 years old when detectives arrived and began processing the scene. The first details they noted were grim and precise. Multiple bullet holes on the passenger side of Morgan's vehicle. After a full examination, the medical examiner would later confirm that Morgan had been struck by 2 gunshot wounds, both to the head. She would not have survived either one. But the most telling detail wasn't on the car itself. It was across the street. In the wet grass on the opposite side of the road, detectives found tire tracks. Deep ones, fresh, the kind that suggested a vehicle had been parked there, stationary, waiting, and then accelerated hard and fast the moment the shots were fired. Detectives had a theory forming immediately. Someone had parked across the street in the dark, waited, watched Morgan walk out her front door, and then fired from inside the vehicle, never even stepping out, before speeding away into the night. But there was a problem, a significant one. It had been raining since the early hours. The tire tracks were too degraded for usable casts, and the rain, which had been falling for hours by the time paramedics arrived, had almost certainly destroyed any trace evidence left on or near Morgan's car. Fingerprints, gone. DNA, gone. Any physical link between the killer and the scene, washed away. Whoever did this had either been extraordinarily lucky, or had known exactly what the rain would do. Detectives began their investigation with almost nothing. No murder weapon, no witnesses, no clean physical evidence. What they did have was a timeline and a boyfriend who wasn't acting like a man in grief. The first red flag came almost immediately. Jason's demeanor during questioning was unusual, not just composed, unusually almost clinically calm. For a man who had just discovered his girlfriend shot dead in the driveway, there was a striking absence of visible emotion. Investigators reviewed the 911 call repeatedly. His voice never wavered. No panic, no breaking point. Flat, measured, controlled, from beginning to end. Then there was the detail about his feet. Jason had walked outside to find Morgan without putting on shoes first. Fine, that happens in a crisis. But later, when police told him he could retrieve a pair of socks from the bedroom with an officer present, Jason paused and then said, "Never mind," and went to the police station barefoot. Why hesitate? Why agree, then suddenly refuse the moment an officer would be watching? Detectives filed that detail away. When Jason surrendered his phone, investigators found something else. A few weeks before the murder, he and Morgan had gotten into a serious fight. During the argument, Morgan had struck him, and in the messages that followed, Jason's tone was dark. He wrote that he would never forgive her, that he no longer loved her. When confronted with the messages, Jason insisted the blow-up had lasted only a couple of days and that they had reconciled long before her death. Looking at their later messages, that appeared to be true. The conversation had returned to normal. Life seemed to have moved on, but detectives weren't satisfied. They went door to door through the neighborhood. They asked every neighbor within range whether they had security cameras, whether they had seen or heard anything that night. Nothing. Not a single camera had caught a car, a person, anything moving through the area during the hours in question. And then came the detail that genuinely baffled investigators. No one had heard the gunshots, not the neighbors across the street, not the houses on either side, not even Jason himself, who had been sleeping less than 30 feet from where his girlfriend was shot twice in the head. 2 gunshots in the middle of a quiet residential thing. Detectives began leaning toward one conclusion early on. This was not random. No valuables had been taken from Morgan's car. Her phone, her cash, everything was still there. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Whoever did this came specifically for Morgan. They knew where she lived. They knew what time she left for work. This was targeted. This was planned. And it was personal. While investigators worked the scene, a separate team began interviewing the people closest to Morgan: family, friends, co-workers, anyone who might shed light on whether she had enemies, whether anyone had reason to want her dead. What they found at her workplace was worse than anyone had anticipated. In the weeks leading up to her murder, Morgan had been dealing with an escalating harassment situation at FedEx that had made her work environment genuinely hostile. Several male co-workers had been targeting her relentlessly: crude comments, unwanted advances, persistent, suffocating attention that she had repeatedly asked them to stop. Morgan had gone to HR, not once, multiple times, and every single time, nothing changed. In fact, after one of her formal complaints, Morgan herself was written up for a dress code violation. The men she had reported, untouched. Morgan, disciplined. Then it escalated to something criminal. The same co-workers took Morgan's phone when she wasn't looking, unlocked it, and went through everything. Her messages, her photos, her private conversations, all of it. When Morgan found out, she was furious. She went back to HR for the final time, and again, the men faced no real consequences. So Morgan made a decision. She was done going through HR. She had drafted a formal email going directly to upper management, above HR entirely. She had other women at the company ready to co-sign it, women who had experienced the same treatment. A collective complaint, documented, organized, impossible to ignore. Morgan had already written it. She never got the chance to send it. Detectives began asking themselves a question that made the air in the room go still. Could these men have killed her just to make sure that email never reached management? Because this wasn't just about losing a job. If Morgan had escalated to the police over the stolen phone, over unauthorized access to her private images, those weren't just fireable offenses. Those were criminal charges, real ones. Suddenly, the harassment case had a motive, and investigators had new names to investigate. One name surfaced almost immediately when detectives began pulling on the threads of Morgan's workplace situation. Jason McDermad, a co-worker. Surveillance footage from inside the FedEx facility clearly showed Jason handing Morgan her phone back after it had been taken. Police brought him in for questioning. His explanation was layered. He said he and Morgan were close friends, that when he found out her phone had been taken, he went over, retrieved it from the other men, and noticed in that moment that they had already been scrolling through her private photos. including intimate, semi-nude images of Morgan. He admitted that he had seen them too. He said when he returned the phone, Morgan realized what had happened, and she was angry with him. But he insisted they had moved past it, that their friendship remained intact. When detectives asked what he thought about Morgan's boyfriend, whether Jason, the boyfriend, could have been involved, McDermad didn't hesitate. He shook his head and said, "He genuinely loved her. He's not that kind of person." Detectives thanked him and moved on, but they didn't forget him. When investigators began quietly interviewing other co-workers, a very different picture of Jason McDermad began emerging. Multiple people said the same thing, independently. Jason was clearly attracted to Morgan, more than attracted. He was fixated on her. And Morgan, after the phone incident, had stopped talking to him. Not reduced contact, stopped entirely. That didn't match what Jason had told police at all. When detectives pulled his phone location data, it checked out. His device had remained at his home during the time of the murder. He had arrived at FedEx at approximately 3 a.m. Co-workers reported nothing unusual. He seemed completely normal. On the surface, he appeared to have an alibi. The two other co-workers involved in the phone incident were also brought in. One of them had admitted feelings for Morgan at some point. She had rejected him directly, but both had solid alibis. Both were cleared, and that was when the case narrowed to two names: Jason, the boyfriend, and Jason McDermad. Detectives spent days going through Morgan's phone line by line. The messages between Morgan and her boyfriend, after the blow-up, were genuinely reconciled. Whatever anger had existed, it had passed. But the messages between Morgan and Jason McDermad, those told a story that investigators would later describe as deeply disturbing. After the phone incident, Jason had been messaging Morgan constantly. Not occasionally, constantly, inventing reasons to talk, creating excuses to meet up one-on-one, asking about her plans, her schedule, her day. To an outside observer, it didn't read like friendship. It read like someone who had convinced himself of a connection that didn't exist. And as Morgan pulled away, as her responses became shorter, colder, less frequent, Jason didn't take the hint. He escalated. He began texting co-workers, asking them to intervene, begging them to help him get back on Morgan's good side, complaining that she wouldn't talk to him anymore, trying to enlist intermediaries, using every available avenue to push his way back into her life. Then came the moment that finally made Morgan act. 4 days before her murder, Morgan had driven across the state to visit family in Columbus. She had told no one at work about the trip. While she was there, her phone buzzed, a message from Jason McDermad. "How's Columbus?" Morgan stared at that message. She had told no one. Her co-workers didn't know where she was. There was no way Jason should have known that, which meant he had found out some other way. Morgan replied immediately, "How do you even know I'm in Columbus?" And then she blocked his number. 4 days later, she was dead. Detectives pulled Jason McDermad's background and found something that made the picture even darker. Months earlier, another woman at FedEx had filed a complaint about him. She said he had flooded her with messages, that he was pushy, aggressive, relentless, and that she believed he had been following her. The complaint went nowhere. Nothing was done. Then Morgan's family shared a series of incidents involving Jason that investigators found deeply troubling. The most disturbing came just days after Morgan's murder. Jason had shown up at her home without telling her family first and set up a memorial outside the house. When Morgan's mother arrived with her granddaughter, Morgan's 8-year-old daughter, Jason immediately walked over to the car, got in, handed the little girl a stuffed animal, and began telling her how beautiful she was, how he didn't want her to ever forget him. Morgan's mother told him to get out. He didn't move. It took another co-worker physically removing him from the vehicle. And there was something else Morgan's mother remembered from months before the murder. Morgan had thrown a birthday party for her daughter, family, friends, a few co-workers, including Jason. At some point during the event, Morgan's mother noticed something strange. Jason was introducing himself to other guests using only his first name, never explaining who he was to Morgan, never providing any context. And Morgan's boyfriend, the man she lived with, was also named Jason. Morgan's mother began to wonder in that moment whether the ambiguity was deliberate, whether Jason McDermad was intentionally blurring the line, letting people assume he was the boyfriend. After Morgan's death, he posted a long, emotional tribute on social media about how special their relationship had been, how close they were, how much she had changed his life. Morgan's family read it and felt sick. It didn't read like a tribute from a co-worker. It read like a man trying to claim ownership of a woman who had never belonged to him. Detectives now had an overwhelmingly clear picture of who Jason McDermad was. A man obsessed with Morgan Fox. A man who had filmed her secretly, who had tracked her location, who had constructed a fantasy relationship and shared it with strangers online as if it were real. What they still didn't have was hard evidence putting him at the scene of the murder. So they went back to the beginning. The tire tracks. The rain had made clean casts impossible, but it hadn't made the measurements useless. Detectives calculated the width and spacing of the tracks and compared them to Jason's vehicle. They matched. The tire dimensions, the distance between the wheels. It wasn't conclusive. Similar vehicles could produce similar tracks. But it was something. And then investigators asked themselves a logical question. If a car spun out in wet grass that night, what would the underside look like? It would be coated in mud. They went to look at Jason's car. It was clean, spotless. Investigators pulled footage from every car wash within a reasonable radius of Jason's workplace. They scanned through hours of recording.